Welcome again to The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha. This is Season 2, Episode 17, entitled, Sid Sees Through His Mask. Previously, when Sid arrived for his first radiation treatment, Di gave him a good luck letter from Casper, who was angling to inherit his grandfather's radiation mask. By the way, this episode took 55 years to write. At the end, I'll explain why. Having resisted the overwhelming desire to jump off the table, run outside, and scare little children with his custom-fitted radiation mask, Sid began to realize that all the warnings he'd ignored about radiation were true. He was feeling itchy, claustrophobic, and had the urge to move every part of his body simultaneously. I wonder, he thought, if the Buddha could scratch one of my itches. Only the spiritual kind, the Buddha admitted. But what Sid really was itching to do was get up and turn off the New Age music they were playing in the background to keep him calm. They'd laughed when he said he wanted them to play heavy metal during the treatment, and just gone ahead and played New Age instead. He felt a lawsuit coming on. Which is the music, the Buddha wondered. Good question, Sid thought, realizing that all he had to do was pretend the insipid New Age tinkling was the sound of the machine, whereas the cacophony of clicks, whirs, and buzzes that ricocheted in his head was the heavy metal music he'd wanted in the first place. Still, unlike some medical procedures, like a colonoscopy without anesthesia, which he'd mistakenly thought he'd find interesting after watching a famous newsperson do it on TV, the radiation didn't really hurt that much. I think it's kind of interesting, the Buddha said. Yeah, well, you don't have to just lie perfectly still, Sid responded, with uncommon petulance to the voice in his head. Try not to talk, Mr. Sid, the lissome radiation technician said from the control booth. Sid felt like a schoolboy caught talking during class. In fact, the tech kind of looked like his fifth-grade teacher. What was her name? Miss Valencia, Venecchio? She was a sight for sore, prepubescent eyes. All his teachers from kindergarten to fourth grade had been matronly-like women with disturbingly styled blue-gray hair. But Miss Valencia was different. She was young. She was tall. She wore blouses that suggested there might be breasts underneath. She wore a silk burgundy choker around her neck that gave him goosebumps. Her hair was bobbed like Jackie Kennedy's, back when Jackie was barely a senator's wife. Some days she wore high heels and a tight-fitting skirt. Do try to stay still, Mr. Sid. Sorry, Sid mumbled without making a sound. Maybe we should come up with something a little less stimulating for you to not think about, the Buddha suggested. You got any bright ideas, Mr. Transcendence? Sid thought to himself, or someone, still surprised how ornery he sounded and felt. Oh, it's just the radiation talking, he reassured himself. Remember the Halloween pumpkin, the Buddha suggested. How do you know about that? I wasn't even you yet, Sid thought. You really don't get how this works, do you? Indeed, one of Sid's earliest and most intense bleed-throughs happened on Halloween freshman year in college, when he was under the influence of something he'd been told was LSD, but was behaving suspiciously like mescaline or psilocybin or God knows what laced with God knows what. I don't know what, the Buddha thought. If you and your friends had only been satisfied with soma, he sighed. I wonder what happened to soma, Sid found himself thinking. All past the peak, go down, the Buddha explained. Guess they had to take it off the market, Sid thought. He'd have to ask LJ. Let's return to the lesson of the pumpkin, the Buddha suggested. Shortly after starting to rush, the phrase they used back then, Sid had left his dorm and began walking across the main college green. Seeing an orange glow on the ground, he looked more closely and saw an oddly iridescent plastic jack-o'-lantern grinning luridly back at him. He spent the next several hours, that would be days in hallucinogenic time, holding the grinning jack-o'-lantern up to people's faces, and, with a similarly glowing, lurid grin, claiming he was looking for an honest man. It made perfect sense that Sid would have a deep mythic connection to Diogenes, the cynic. Even though he'd never heard of him, the ancient Greek philosopher was notoriously obscene, dismissive of all conventions, suffered no fools, and made fun of the pretensions of everyone from Plato to Alexander the Great. He would walk around the agora in broad daylight, holding a lamp up to people's faces looking for an honest man. Now, as far as Plato, Sid had only read the cliff notes of the symposium and thrown it across the room when Eryximachus started saying they were going to talk about love without heavy drinking. To him, that was like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. And all he knew about Alexander was that the guy had conquered a lot of land when he was young, and some people thought he was, well, great. Although there was something about Cleopatra being beneath him from an ancestral perspective. Oh well. Still, that Diogenes guy, what was he really looking for? What did he mean, honest man? Why don't you ask him, the Buddha suggested. The suggestion didn't just strike a chord. It took a sledgehammer to Sid's uncollected subconscious, and tears came to his eyes. Are you okay, Mr. Sid? I know it's uncomfortable, but we're almost done, the technician said. Just another minute. Diogenes came in slowly, peeking around corners of Sid's tumor, carefully avoiding the photon beam the way Superman would avoid kryptonite. The cancer appeared to him like a boulder suspended in a river that runs every which way, whirlpools of water, thoughts scurrying over and around it, ducking under the boulder like limbo dancers, or tumbling over it like high jumpers. Still looking? The Buddha chuckled kindly. Sid loved it when he heard chuckling, but he didn't dare chuckle back. The technician undoubtedly frowned upon chuckling. Just another minute, Mr. Sid. Didn't she say that a minute ago? Sid thought. Yes, Diogenes sighed, still looking. For an honest man, Sid wondered, pleased he could remember that long-forgotten vision. Well, you're doing a great job, the Buddha said encouragingly. It's just... He paused. What? Diogenes wondered. Yeah, what? Sid wondered. It was the first time he felt an equal among the ancients. Well, I wouldn't bring it up, the Buddha said rather formally, as if he were convening an academic symposium. Except it's not often we have a brain for a conference room, especially one penetrated by a high-intensity vibration of a type only recently arrived from the collective unconscious of our favorite planet. I didn't know you played favorites, Sid thought, pleased he was going psyche-as-psyche with his Buddha nature. It does kind of put things in a different perspective, Diogenes admitted. I'm so delighted to be with the two of you, the Buddha said out of the blue. I am so delighted to be with the two of you, Diogenes agreed, although his voice held something back. To be honest, he was happy to be there, but not exactly delighted. Sid, however, was delighted. In fact, his body and brain were filled with a kind of pleasure that rivaled his most ecstatic experiences of sex or drugs, even when it was both at the same time. Just another minute, Mr. Sid. Didn't she say that a minute ago? Sid thought. Zeno died before your time, I think, the Buddha said, by way of indirect lighting. You mean the arrow still hasn't reached the target? Diogenes asked plaintively. The arrow is the target, the Buddha said. Sounds like something the Buddha would say, Sid thought. Just another minute, Mr. Sid. Did she say that a minute ago? Sid thought. Are you suggesting? Diogenes managed to go from confused and discouraged to interested and curious in just 3 words. Well, see for yourself, the Buddha said. You mean me? Sid thought. You mean the inevitable is inevitable? Diogenes wondered. Inevitably, Sid thought, pleased to beat Buddha to the punch, even though they were one and the same. You mean I'll always be searching? Diogenes asked plaintively. The joke was on me all along. Look at that, the Buddha said suddenly, as if trying to change the subject, which he was and wasn't. Catching his etheric drift, Diogenes gazed around him and was overwhelmed by the stunning multiplexity of the universe inside Sid's brain. Sensing his reaction, Sid decided to take a look for himself. Wow, that's me? Atoms and molecules and that stuff they call particles and electrical impulses and flashing lights, that's all me? It's all any of us are, and I mean all, the Buddha said. There he goes, talking about the all again, Sid thought, stifling a chuckle. It's just the Buddha talking, the Buddha said, tilting his head back and roaring with laughter. Fortunately, Sid's head was pretty much screwed into place. Just another minute, Mr. Sid. Didn't she say that a minute ago, Sid thought? So, do you think he's an honest man? The Buddha asked Diogenes, gesturing towards Sid. I can't see past his mask, the ancient philosopher said sadly. His mask? the Buddha asked simply. My mask? Sid thought. He decided to try seeing past it himself. When he looked out, everything was kind of fuzzy. But when he looked in, everything was perfectly clear. Huh, he thought. Huh, Diogenes whispered. He found himself once again sitting cross-legged on the hard-packed earth next to a column on the edge of a walkway, his lantern beside him, surrounded by the relentless summer glare, clouds of dust, and swirls of humanity. He stood up stiffly and leaned against the column for a few moments before reaching down, picking up the lantern, and putting it carefully, almost reverently, on a stone bench behind him. As he stepped into the sunlight and began walking away, he lifted his hand in greeting to passers-by, smiling shyly, like a grandfather who just woke up from a nap and realized all his friends had left. Watching him reminded the Buddha of when, at last, he rose from the Bodhi tree. How refreshing it was to finally stand up, straighten his legs, stretch, and begin to walk in the world again. As he watched them both disappear, Sid found himself in an oddly reflective mood, wondering what things would look like when they took his mask off. And he wondered, who would wear it next? Just another minute, Mr. Sid. I usually don't pull the curtain back to talk about how these episodes come about, but this is a good story. One night in 1970, during my first semester of college, I was walking around the campus when, like Sid, I noticed an eerie orange glow on the ground. Since I, like Sid, happened to be under the influence of a hallucinogen of some sort, I regarded the glow with some suspicion, and only after convincing myself it meant me no harm, reached down to pick it up. It was a small plastic Halloween pumpkin with a black strap, sadly abandoned by its trick-or-treating owner. Picking it up by the strap, I began to stroll around some archetypal lane, looking for an honest man. It was an all-boys college at the time. I don't know if I'd ever heard of Diogenes the Cynic. I certainly had never studied him. But the feeling of holding up a lantern looking for an honest man was clearly buried somewhere in my psyche. Over the next hour or two, I held the lantern in front of the faces of people I passed by. Some found it amusing, others somewhat annoying, others baffling. 40 years later, around 2011, when I began working on this book, I picked up that pumpkin story where I'd left off. At the time, I was working on a project in which I'd study people from history and ask them what they had to say for themselves today. It was an act of imagination, not what they called channeling. So I invited Diogenes into a scene in which the character now known as Sid is getting radiation while the Buddha looks on. The chapter had a good start and solid premise, but I couldn't find an honorable ending. I tried again 5 years later when I did the second major pass of the novel, and it still didn't work. A few weeks ago, a full 55 years after picking up that plastic pumpkin, as I took the 2017 draft and began transforming it into this serial novel, I decided to give Diogenes one more chance. Again, the setup was good. His arrival on the scene worked fine. But then what? I'd spent the week as usual working my way towards my self-imposed Saturday morning deadline for these pieces, but was slightly hampered by what seemed to be a change-of-season asthma episode that wouldn't quit. By Thursday night, I decided it was time to go to the ER, and soon I was lying on a fairly comfortable hospital bed, taking serious hits on a nebulizer, while oxygen, a fabulous molecule, worked its way into my bloodstream through one of those cannula tube devices. When my oxygen level didn't rise to the doctor's satisfaction, she suggested they give me an oxygen mask to put over my nose and mouth. Having nothing better to do but stare at the ceiling and breathe, I began thinking about me with that plastic pumpkin, and Sid with his mask, and Diogenes with his lamp. Soon, the elusive ending of this story became obvious. I saw Diogenes put his lamp down in the Greek agora, the marketplace, and walk away, a huge weight off his shoulders. I saw the Buddha remembering what a relief it was to put down his meditative labors and stand up from the Bodhi tree. And I lay there wondering, as does Sid, when it would be time for Sid to put down his mask, and who would wear it next. As I fixed the image in my mind and took in a few more healthy drags of oxygen, I realized it was Halloween morning. I hope you're enjoying The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha and that you'll share it with anyone who takes their spirituality too seriously or perhaps not seriously enough. New paid subscribers get a paperback copy of Season 1 and an official Sid Om cap. In addition, Sid and or the Buddha have graciously agreed to respond to one profound spiritual conundrum or frivolous question from new subscribers. You can go to davidblistein.substack.com to subscribe. Thanks for listening.